If you watch the first episodes of this series, you heard me talk about houses I lived in as a teenager. Houses that you felt watched in, and houses where my family came apart at the seams, and a house that my brother and I fled in the middle of the night with our baby sister in our arms, and one where the basement was so creepy I couldn't stand to walk through it. Where my father and his mother just went at each other's throats all the time. And where something, called my name. Just like in the other house. Wow. So, here's another place where some spooky happenings took place. Now, I want to be clear about something before I start. When my partner and I moved into this house, we did not know what we were moving into. Our landlady was a co-worker of mine. Of ours, actually. And we trusted her. She was a decent person. And she knew what was in that house. And she did not exactly tell us before we moved in. She only said that it was haunted. Anyway, she told us afterward. But by that time, we'd already fled. We were only there 3 months. 3 months is not a long time. But I want to tell you what happened in those 3 months because a lot happened. I want you to understand that by the end of it, we were not slow walking out the door. We were gone. The house was over 100 years old. And I want you to sit with that for a moment. 100 years of people living and dying and carrying their grief and their addictions and their damage through those rooms. 100 years of whatever accumulates in the walls of a place like that. It was a 2-story house on a street in my hometown with a fruit in its name. The ground floor was livable, functional, unremarkable really. And it was the second floor though that had the weight to it. The upstairs landing in particular. And the 2 rooms up there were only 2 rooms, believe it or not. There was just something about being up there that felt different from the moment we moved in. Heavier and more present. My cats wouldn't even go up there. I remember one time my cat Tigger went up there and he got stuck in one of the rooms, probably the one that, the door was shut to. And I went up there and the door was shut and he was inside the room. And as soon as I opened the door, he shot out. It surprised me. It kind of scared me, really. I had no idea he was in there. Anyway, the room across from that one held our landlady's late husband's old work uniforms. And she hadn't cleared them out. They were still, there, just hanging in the closet. The door to that room had a habit of opening on its own. Not swinging dramatically, not slamming, just opening, quietly. As if someone on the other side had turned the handle and the knob, really, and pushed it open. I didn't really notice it at first, My fiance, he wasn't my fiance then. He noticed, but he didn't say anything. And I guess he told himself it was the age of the house. The way old doors settle and shift and stop latching properly. I'm sure he's told himself things like that before. After all, he's a home builder, He's probably worked on a bunch of old houses that, were reputed to be haunted. Anyway, I started noticing that the door would be open, and I would think, I closed that yesterday, and it would be open the next day. It turned out that's when the dark entity that had been attached to the landlady's late husband, that's when it would open the door at night. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. It was just my partner and me. That's it, just the 2 of us, plus our animals. I had 2 cats that I'd had for a couple of years, and he went and got a puppy. Though I did not want it, I'm just not a dog person, and I just did not want a dog. My cats did not like them, and I did not want any around. And he chose a bully breed of all dogs, because you could just get them for $10 a dozen, basically. But he paid $100 for this dog. I think the the woman spoiled it, and her boyfriend wanted to get rid of it because he probably wanted to be a guard dog. And so, it was a much smaller household than, my previous ones. A little bit quieter and more contained. And our landlady, the co-worker, she had moved into another place, while she and her husband were still alive, because she said he was mentally abusive. So she wasn't living in the house with us. She was just renting it out. And she rented it to us for a discount because we were supposed to be doing work on it. Because her late husband's bully breed dogs had just wrecked the place. Another reason I didn't want dogs, because they ruin a place, It's just all there is to it. A lot of people say that about cats, but my cats, yeah, they messed up some couple of like sofas, trying to scratch on them until I squirted them with water and made them stop. But they never wrecked the house the way a dog will, especially big ones like his. And I don't know what happened to the man's dogs, but the landlady didn't keep them. She had this little poodle, and when she moved back into the house after we had gone, she adopted a cat. And she was into like new age stuff, and there were still some magical items in the house, which I didn't think was a problem, because at that time I was into that stuff myself. Anyway, this her husband's presence was I think still there. And he had been an alcoholic, which she told us he drank heavily and just became very verbally abusive to her. And he had actually tried to turn their children against her, and he succeeded with the son. They had twin daughters whom he spoiled. When they graduated from high school, he bought them matching Mustangs. Yeah. And he just spoiled the kids. And I think that was another point of contention between them, especially since he had his grown son living there. And the guy I found porn material in the room that he had stayed in. That was the one my cat got stuck in. And it was just disgusting. So that tells you what kind of person he was. But anyway, I just thought about, the detail of her, the fact that her husband had been an alcoholic, and whether that darkness in the house had attached itself to him because of, his addiction. The way those things draw to people, in the grips of substance abuse, or, people whose pain is very close to the surface. Or whether he drank because the darkness was already there and he was trying to get away from it the only way he knew how. I don't know which came first. I'm not sure it matters. What I know is that she said the presence was attached to him, and that it had been in that house before they moved in, and it was there while they lived there, and it was still there after he was gone. And she was, she still lives there. She's still alive, and I'm sure the darkness is attached to her now. Anyway, we moved into a house where something had been waiting for a long time. The feeling of being watched was, almost immediate. I don't know if it was there the first night, but I'm sure by the end of that week, it was there, because every time I would get up in the middle of the night and go use the bathroom, and you had to pass that landing, steps that led up to the second floor landing, and I would always look up there, and I did this even before my boyfriend told me that there was something up there, and he saw something up there. Upstairs was where you really felt it the most, especially the landing. That space between the rooms at the top of the stairs. If I had to go up there for something, I would go, and I would do what I needed to do, and I would come back down. And I remember going up there trying to clean up the place because there was a bunch of crap up there. Her son just left a bunch of trash, which tells me he was not a clean person. And we took a bag of crap out of that, up this upstairs room. And I guess the dad hadn't cleaned up after his son moved out. He just shut the door and left it at that. The man ate pizza all the time, and stuff like, Chef Boyardee and just bull crap, really. And he had a lot of like red pepper flake packets from pizza places, and it was a hot mess, really. It was a hot mess that we had to clean up. And I know when you went upstairs, she just did not linger. even my boyfriend didn't linger. And he wasn't as afraid of it as I was. You know, we didn't really say anything the first week or so. But we just stopped going upstairs unless we had to go. Because my cat, he you know how they cough up hairballs. He coughed up a hairball on the landing, so I had to go up there and clean it. And on the landing was this like you know, like some apparatus where you would hang, you know, laundry to dry. And I would always look up there. I don't know why, because I just felt something. And oh Lord, my fiance finally told me that he saw a dark figure standing up there. He said it was just standing there. He could see the shape of the head and the you know, the body, like it was wearing a cloak. And after that, I was just freaked. I didn't want to get up in the middle of the night and go to the bathroom. Not only that, it was cold because the heating system did not work properly. So we had these like the landlady, her late husband had all these I think the dogs had ruined it, of course. That's what she told me. They had chewed through it and just messed it up. And it was going to cost a devil to fix. You know, a lot of money. A couple of $1,000. And she didn't have the money right then until his insurance, you know, went through. And it didn't go through right away. And so it was cold, even with those space heaters that man had in there. And he had some pretty good space heaters. And the living room had a fireplace. So a lot of times my boyfriend would stay in there and sleep on the couch. And I was in there in my bed that I, you know, had brought from my apartment, and in the room that the late husband had stayed in. But I think he mostly stayed in the living room himself, trying to keep warm. And you know, it was just weird. I didn't even like opening the closets. My cats hid all the time. They didn't come out. The dog even acted weird. And this man, he had like they always had animals, she said. And a lot of them were buried on the property. These former dogs and cats. Yeah, I saw their graves. They were marked because the husband had put like something cement over them and inscribed the animal's name and the birth date or the year they got it and the date the animal died. And I don't know, that it was just like the animals didn't want to be in there. Like I said, the cats hid all the time. The dog was just, well, the dog was a puppy, so he just whimpered all the time. It was annoying. And one night, I don't know how to say this. We were in bed, and we heard a man's voice in the kitchen talking. And we heard the dog whimper, and I don't know if he was talking to calm the dog down or what. Because, you know, like I said, her late husband had bully breed dogs. He'd had 2 of them. And maybe he was consoling the puppy. And we thought someone was in there. I mean, it was clear enough that we both heard it. And our first instinct was not anything paranormal. We were like, someone has broken in. And, you know, my boyfriend jumped up. He kept this bat or some kind of large stick in the corner. He went and grabbed it. And we went through every room. And the doors were all locked. The windows were locked. You know, everything was just secure. There was just no one in there. And there hadn't been anyone in there. Yet we both heard a man's voice in an empty kitchen and a locked house in the middle of the night. And you better believe I didn't sleep easily after that. I don't know how he slept, but I didn't. And then there was the latch. My partner and his friend from our, you know, cooking school, that's where I met my fiance. And they were sitting in the living room, just the 2 of them talking, probably, you know, doing a little 420, you know, nothing unusual. And they both watched as the latch on the door to that room, it just lifted up on its own. It just went up into, it's like someone had used a finger to push it up. And the door opened. It's like, how can that happen? It was closed. And the guy left. I'm not sure how long he stayed, because he was actually had moved in with us, and he would stay sometimes, and he never came back after that. I don't blame him. I don't know how he didn't even just feel the presence, but it turned out he did feel the presence when he was lying in the living room. He said that something actually peered through that doorway at him. It was like a glass door, but mostly, panes. So you could just, easily look through it. And he said one night something looked in at him. And it wasn't, wasn't me. And it wasn't my, boyfriend. And he was just freaked. And I was thinking, this guy, he's a bit of a junkie. And I was thinking it was that. I tried to tell myself that. But, I don't know if he was the type of person given to melodrama. But my boyfriend is not. He's not someone who frightens easily, really. And when he told me that the guy had felt that, had seen that, I was like, oh my God. And, I think some of it, the landlady, like I said, she had a new age store. And there were some items still in there and some old magic kits. They didn't really, well, I don't know if they ever worked anyway, but they had like scented things, and the stuff was like, the smells had really gone. And I would play around with these things instead of throwing them away. I was using the salts that just shake around and doing these meditation and these little spells. And I think a lot of that stuff that she brought in also attributed to the atmosphere in that house. Maybe there was something there before they moved in, but she added to it. Just like I've added to some things, and I will tell you about those in another episode. Anyway. After we left, after we had already moved into somewhere smaller, only probably about 2 miles from that house, to be honest. That's when our landlady told us that there was a dark entity attached to her husband. And that dark entity was still there. And the only thing a dark entity can be is a demon. Because I believe that when we die, we don't come back. There's no, ghosts hanging around, trying to, communicate with the living. They're demons. So, I'm not sure why she didn't tell us this before we moved in. I guess she just wanted the rent money. And, I have complicated feelings about that. Even though she was a decent person. But she may have told herself that what she and her family experienced wasn't necessarily what we would. She probably convinced herself that it was attached specifically to her late husband and wouldn't touch anyone else, But the truth is, it was there. What I know is that we heard a man's voice in that kitchen that night. And my boyfriend and his friend watched a latch lift up by itself and the door creak open. He saw a figure on the landing. And I felt those, I felt like I was watched. Now, I spent some time doing a video recording in the room that had been her husband's, so the actual room that the door wouldn't stay shut to. And when I was doing the recording, I just felt like something was in there with me. I felt very uneasy, but I went ahead and did the recording because at that time I was in film school and I needed it, for film school. I was supposed to do some sort of perform some sort of script that they gave us, and I don't even know what I got on it. It was BS because a lot of people who taught the screenwriting classes, they didn't have any credits. It was just crap. But anyway, that was the room where her husband's uniforms are still hanging in the closet, and like I said, the door would open, and she moved into it probably 2 months after we had left, and she got a roommate, a social worker, believe it or not, and the social worker stayed in that room. And the door would often open, but the woman wasn't bothered by it. I don't know if she was a Christian or she just was naive or just didn't care. I don't know. But as far as I know, it's still there. Still in it. I hope she's doing okay. My former landlady. I don't wish anything bad on her. I just wish she had told us more about what was in that house before we moved into it. because I probably would not have done it. In fact, I know I wouldn't. I just can't explain the things that happened, in there. And just being watched all the time. I would be in the kitchen making pizza, cooking pasta, making burgers, or whatever. And I always felt like something was just there, standing in the doorway. If I did laundry, I felt like something was back there with me. I mean, I went around that house with sage and a white candle, trying to make it, get rid of the entity. But it never left. So I guess it needed someone more religious than I, because at that time I wasn't. I believed in Jesus as a prophet, but I was not into God. I just wasn't. I was sort of agnostic. Yeah. Our landlady, she believed that presence, that demonic entity or whatever, was attached to her husband. And I believe her. I've seen enough in enough places to believe that some things hold on to people. That grief and addiction and whatever else was moving through that man's life left a residue that outlasted him. And that residue was there on the landing, watching my boyfriend, watching us in his house, in the house that it felt like it owned. So we were relieved when we both left, both of us. The relief was immediate. And even though I moved into a house that was just as cold and even more haunted, but we didn't know that then, I just felt relieved. We walked away, we didn't look back. But I'm looking back now, because that's what this short series is. It's me finally looking back.